Hi, Faith.
Hey Shauna, how are ya?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Between illnesses and craziness, we've finally gotten back around to recording.
You did.
Welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back. What are we talking about today?
Today, we are talking about military services and military burials. And this is just so important because I don't know if you found the same thing, but when I was teaching my students about military services, it was always a point of confusion
Always.
because everyone thinks that if you were in the military, you get a free burial, you get a marker, you get a
All
21 gun salute, you get the flag, you get all of this, and that's just not true.
well, now you've set me off because literally in my PowerPoint for mortuary school, there is a slide that says, if I ever hear you call a three rifle volley, a 21 gun salute, you will fail mortuary school. I will disown you and never speak to you again.
Yep,
You know who gets a 21 gun salute? A president and a visiting royal. I've never seen one.
yep,
You've never seen one. Most of us never will. And so that is just my one thing. I don't know why. That is just the one term that sets me off every time because it's just used so frequently and that's inaccurate.
it is. And what a lot of people don't understand is it's a form of stolen valor to request an honor like that when it's not what comes with your position.
It's not. And what's honestly difficult about this for practitioners is families don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And they come in with expectations that are very, very unrealistic. And we get to be the ones to tell them that those things aren't real. And they don't get any of that. And we kind of complicated ourselves within the industry because, for example, I have had several families come to me when I was working in a particular funeral home and say, well, we know veterans get a free casket.
Mm.
What? No. But one of the competing funeral homes had a billboard that said, at this funeral home, veterans get a free 20 gauge whatever. And so families interpret it as every veteran gets a free casket everywhere when it was really a one particular promotion done by one funeral home, for a limited time. And so there are funeral homes that cater to veterans and do certain things for veterans that then becomes shared out into the greater population as that's things veterans get.
Mhm.
It's really not.
But, we should also back up and address the fact that it all starts with that DD 214. A DD 214 is a discharge form. And unless it is an honorable discharge, you get nothing.
Mhm.
But as a run of the mill, let's say, veteran, which I know there's really no such thing, but common ranks,
An enlisted
private.
an
Yeah,
enlisted serviceman who served less than 20 years.
right. What types of things should they be able to expect?
Well, I'll tell you this. Um, I do not work for the VA. Shauna doesn't either. But we get our information, from va.gov/burials memorials. More information is there than you could ever want about veterans benefits. And I highly suggest if you are a veteran or you have a veteran in your family that you become very familiar with that website. Generally speaking, when it comes to funeral care, and again, every case is different, truly, but generally, there are, a burial flag that a
Mhm.
person is entitled to. Um, there are military honors from the branch of service, generally a 2 or 3 man team, that will do a full flag fold, flag presentation, playing of taps. You are generally going to be entitled to a burial space and a government concrete liner in a national cemetery and a government headstone. What I didn't say in any of that is that funeral expenses are paid.
Exactly.
They are not. It
Exactly.
is possible that you could receive burial reimbursement up to a certain dollar amount, depending on a million different things about your service.
Mhm.
But as a funeral home, we get no money from VA, period.
Right.
It must be paid by the family to us, whatever services they select. They can then apply for reimbursement from, the VA, and they may or may not get, some of that reimbursed. Case by case is going to be different. So again, the general public doesn't understand what we do, and why would they?
Mhm.
But remembering that funeral homes and cemeteries are different things, even if they're on the same property, they're
Right.
different businesses, truly. And so
Yeah.
what may be provided by just because a grave space at a national cemetery and a, concrete liner or interment in or enrichment in a columbarium for veterans is something that's taken care of, that has nothing to do with the
With the
funeral
funeral.
expenses. So that body or that decedent still has to be transferred from place of death to a funeral home. It still has to undergo preparation, whether that's embalming or other kinds of prep, still will have whatever services they're going to have, whether that's a family viewing, whether that's direct cremation, whatever it is, all of that still happens and has to be paid for by the family. The
Mhm.
only thing that's provided truly at no cost directly to the veteran, is that space in a national cemetery, government liner, government headstone, the end.
And one of the things that I always thought was kind of cool about the grave marker
Mhm,
is that if, let's say, the individual was cremated and kept at home,
mhm.
you can actually order the marker and have it shipped to your home.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to go to the
right.
cemetery. It doesn't have to be
Yeah,
set at the cemetery. If you want a garden space for mom, you can order her marker and you can have it out in the garden if you want to. It doesn't have to go to a cemetery,
yeah.
which I always thought was pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. I mean, you can order little medallions with their branch on them
Yeah.
for wherever. So there's some very small little things like that that exist. But by and large, and again, in one of my PowerPoints I have, the VA pays for veteran funerals. False.
Hmm.
100% false. There may be a small reimbursement possible
Right.
in the future once the funeral bill is paid by the family.
Right.
And there's nothing harder than for well, there's a lot of things hard for funeral directors, but one of the hardest things is when a family comes in with the assumption that they don't have to pay for any of this. And we get
Yes.
to be the ones to tell
And
them,
it's, oh gosh, and I know you've been in the same situation as I have a few times where you know you have to bring that up right at the beginning,
"Percent."
because if you don't, they're going to go through and pick everything out as if they're not paying for it. And then if you hand them a bill at the end, they're going to be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So it's something you have to address before they even go through it, or else you're going to have two sets of arrangements with the same family.
Absolutely. And it's really sad. And one of the things, I have veterans as friends, veterans as family members, as students, and they all tell me, when we get out of the service, there's no education given to us about any of this.
Hmm.
We just assume and what happens with so many things in funeral services, you'll hear, well, my friend's dad's brother's whatever,
Uncle, nephew,
hairdresser's uncle got all this and they were a veteran.
doesn't mean you do.
That's not, first of all, it's probably all wrong, but second of all, that doesn't mean you do.
I
And
wonder
so,
if it's the same cousin's uncle's father's brother that saw somebody sit up in a mortuary
yes,
one time.
yeah, same guy, probably, undoubtedly.
That's straight up
But
on the table, Faith. Straight
yeah,
up.
totally did. But, we can't sit here and go through every possible benefit for every veteran under any circumstance because there's so many variables. There's so many different eligibility requirements for every individual part of it. But what we really want students, the public, anybody to understand is that The information is out there, you just have to look for it. It's va.gov burials memorials. And you can look through all of that information. It's hard to read, it's hard to understand, but it does exist.
Hmm.
And if you are a veteran, or see yourself being responsible for the disposition of a veteran, or are going to be meeting families, you'll be meeting veteran families. This is something we really need to be on top of. Give families those resources, you know,
Absolutely.
because I have not yet met a veteran's family that got it right.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the actual military honors.
Mhm.
It's important, so important, to really choose your vernacular when you're referring to these things. You do
Mhm.
not order military honors, you
You request.
request military honors. And that does not guarantee that they're going to be able to show up.
Nope.
So, although military honors, you're not entitled to them. You're entitled to request them.
Mhm.
And that's something that that family has to know. Because I
Yeah.
did have a couple of scenarios where we had a team that was on its way out, something happened, and they weren't able to make it.
Mhm.
And with military honors, that happens frequently
Yeah.
because there's not specific teams that are designed to just do nothing but military honors. All of these people have other things that they're doing, and stuff comes up,
And there's not, a big group of them just available at any time. And so
right?
depending on where you live, you may not it may be very difficult to get one branch, but it's easier to get a different one, depending on
Yeah,
where you live and what's around you. But yeah, there is no guarantee of military honors for a veteran. You
right.
fill out a request. Sometimes they'll confirm, sometimes you won't. You'll just hope,
They'll just
you know,
show up.
they'll just show up or they won't, which is why
Yeah.
funeral directors need to know how to fold and present a flag,
Hmm.
because it's kind of a crapshoot whether or not you'll actually have honors in many places. So yeah,
The
that how we
further away you are from a military base, the less likely it is that you'll be able to
sure,
get them.
but
So,
it's important how we talk about that, because I think the assumption is that they just all get them, and it would be nice if that were true, but it's setting and managing expectations.
yeah,
And it's as simple as saying, we'll put in a request for military honors. It's a request only, talking about that. And but I think it's okay to tell a family, if military honors from, the specific branch are unable that day, my staff and I know how to professionally fold and present a flag that will still be part of your ceremony, all of that. Because again, we can't guarantee something we can't control, right?
absolutely.
And we
And
have to, yeah.
yeah, and if you are called upon to present the flag, let's say,
Mhm.
another important thing to note is that when you are presenting the flag and you say the line, on behalf of the President of the United States of America, I present this flag for your loved one's service. That is not an announcement made to the entire group. That is a conversation between yourself and the person you're presenting the flag to. You kneel by that person if they're sitting, or you walk directly up to them and
Mhm.
you quietly speak to that person.
Right. Yeah.
It's not for the entire crowd, it's for whomever is receiving that flag.
Yeah.
That's always very important.
Yeah, I've seen that. You're absolutely right. But one of the things, again, this is just my little middle one of my little trigger points, this 21 gun salute.
Yep.
I don't know where this became what this is referred to, because a 21 gun salute is a specific thing that is reserved for very, very specific individuals. I've never seen one. You've never seen one. Dwayne Hill may have seen one, that's it. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just not, I've buried governors, I've buried congressmen, I have never seen one.
Right.
it is so very rare, and you have to be so it's on such a very small, it's like three people that can get one.
There's
Um,
also the display of the boots and the arms.
yeah.
Um, and maybe you can help me with this. I do not remember. There are specific ranks where you can display the arms, and I knew what they are at one point. I don't remember them right now. Do you know
Mhm.
off the top of your
I
head?
don't off the top of my head. I mean, but
If you happen to know,
no, tell us.
send us an email. Let us know. We'll add it to our next show.
Sure. Um, but what most veterans get is called a rifle volley, or a
Right.
rifle salute, or a three volley rifle salute. It is not a 21 gun salute. That is your that's an actual specific thing. So please stop perpetuating this, because it's the wrong thing. You're saying the wrong thing, and I
Mhm.
don't know. But
Well, it's
one of
like
the
saying you're going to a wedding when you're going to the prom. It's a totally
Yeah,
different
kind of.
it's a
It means
totally
something.
different event.
It's like saying I'm a doctor when I'm not, when I'm a, I don't know, a
A
medical assistant.
PA.
There, yeah, something like
Yeah,
that. It's an earned
absolutely.
thing that if you didn't earn, we shouldn't be referring to it as that. Now,
Absolutely.
and that's how I feel. Um, but one of the things that perpetuates this, I think, is again that people, they don't know what we do. They don't know all the things that go on behind the scenes. And I'm very, very grateful for all the retirees and the men usually that serve in VFW, American Legion, all of those things that
Mhm.
will come to a cemetery. And many of these groups have their own little service. They supplement honors, and they will do a rifle salute, but they are not the military branch. And
And
so,
they are not always as polished.
well, no, but what I think happens is many people, you know, request that from their local VMW, their American Legion. So families go to gravesides for friends, neighbors, and they see this rifle salute for their friend, and they think that that's from the military, but it's not. It's from a different organization, and oftentimes the family's paying an honorarium for that.
Right.
So and we can be as specific and as much as we want, and we can say, maybe say that this is the post, whatever. People don't care. They're just going to see what they see and absorb the information, and think that that's military honors. But when you order American Legion, veterans, VFW, whoever it is, um they are a group of veterans of all branches usually, and they do sometimes a better job than others, but it's a nice service that they offer to fellow veterans to
Absolutely.
receive that ceremony that they may not receive because honors don't show up or whatever reason.
Mhm.
But that group themselves is not the military branch. That is not the Air Force. That is a third party that's providing a service that's oftentimes either paid for or, given some kind of honorarium or tip essentially for. But when people see this, they assume that that's what everybody
What's
gets, but
normal.
it's not.
Right.
It's
Right.
it's optional, and it's oftentimes there's a cost associated with it. So we get to
Yeah.
explain, yes, I know you were at your friend Dave's service 2 weeks ago and he got this. I happen to be the funeral director for that service too, but that was another group, and you know what I mean? And they're never good conversations when you
No.
have to tell a family that what they thought they were getting for no cost is not correct.
What they're getting.
Yeah,
Right. And it feels so much to the family like it's a bait and switch of some sort.
totally.
And it's not. We're not the ones that promised this.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that's perpetuated through generations and generations of
Yeah,
individuals who've served in the military, and there
it
was a point in
is.
time where there was more covered by the military than what is
Sure.
currently covered.
Sure. And again, just my example of, so I live in a city with I live a mile and a half north of the National Cemetery. Well, between my house and the National Cemetery, there's a funeral home that on their sign says the name of the cemetery, funeral home. They're not affiliated with that cemetery. National cemeteries don't have funeral homes.
Right, right.
But because they're a block or two north of it, they have created this marketing idea, which, I mean, you feel how you want about it. Maybe it's unethical, maybe it's genius, I don't know, where they're
Yeah.
blank and blank blank funeral home, and whatever National Cemetery funeral home. But they're not affiliated. Uh,
Right. It's
but
like calling it the Denver Funeral Home. You're not
yeah,
affiliated with the city of Denver, you just happen to be there.
you just named yourself something similar, you know?
Right.
Um, and so people do think that the things that that funeral home does is what every funeral home should do. Because, like another funeral home in town, they have marketed themselves to veterans, and as a result, they offer discounts or free caskets maybe, or free parts of their services to veterans to get that business. But that doesn't mean that the funeral home down the street does that. So I've had that happen multiple times here. Well, I know I get a free casket because the sign on this street says veterans free casket. At that funeral home, though, that's like saying Costco has this on sale, but that doesn't
You
mean
want to get it at Kroger,
you're
right?
going to get it at Kroger. Yeah, kind of that. And it's confusing to people, and I get it, but it's just,
I should have used a more national chain. Nobody knows who Kroger is outside of where I'm at.
oh, I know who Kroger
Oh,
is.
Walmart.
Walmart. Yeah, Target. Target has a sale. That doesn't mean Walmart does, or Walmart's going to
Right,
price match Target. Yeah.
right. Oh, now, here's one thing that always seems to confuse people.
hmm
They they seem to think that there is a lump sum death benefit, just like there is for Social Security.
Can we call it a lump sum? Could we call it like chump change? I think that's a little
Or we
more.
can call it chump
Okay,
change. We
thanks.
can call it chump change.
Okay. Lump sum, geez.
Lump sum. I mean, I suppose if you took a bunch of
In
quarters and put them in a
quarters, I
you
guess
could
it's a
call
lump,
it a lump
but
sum because you could make a lump.
yeah,
Here you go. Here's your
right,
lump sum.
right.
Cha-ching.
God. No, there's
Yeah,
not. There's absolutely no dollar amount paid to families. There's no, like I say, there's reimbursement potential for eligible veterans with eligible funeral expenses. Again, the variables are infinite. That could pay up to whatever, or up to whatever. Um, but it's reimbursement based to the family only if they're
yeah.
eligible.
And it's usually not more than like 250 bucks.
Oh, no, I mean, some of it, I think some of it,
Some of it.
goes up to like 2,500 or this, I mean, there's multiple different ones. So
Right,
again,
right.
you know, we can point families in the direction of where this information is, but we don't administer these programs. We don't, can't possibly memorize them all. There's too many.
Sure.
Um, and so, as practitioners, again, we need to know where the resources are. But what I wish we did a better job of, and maybe we do, and there's just not interest, is educating the veterans in our communities about these things.
Yes.
And I know a lot of funeral homes do have like lunch and learns or this or that, and maybe they're well attended, or but probably not. And so I'm not sure where the appropriate place is to do that, but I think there's an opportunity for funeral homes, especially in areas that have a national cemetery, areas near military bases, to have a public education campaign about veterans' death
Absolutely.
benefits. And I know some funeral homes do that, but I think every funeral home could benefit from that, not only just in getting out in your community and educating, your fellow community members, but honestly, hopefully mitigating some of that when the family comes in and thinks that they're getting all this stuff and they're not.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. National cemeteries. We brought that up. Now let's talk about timelines
yeah.
for national cemeteries. If someone died today
Mhm.
and I'm trying to put them in a national
Yeah,
cemetery, do you think that I could have them in one next week when I have my service?
possibly, but here's the thing. I don't know. So our national cemetery here, I'm in Denver. You can find me, and it's Fort Logan National Cemetery, and their staff is awesome, and it's a great cemetery, truly. But one of my favorites to go to, honestly. Um, but They only have services from a certain time to a certain time, and it may be different now, don't quote me. When I was an active, daily funeral director here, the first service was at 9 a.m. and the last service was at 2:30. And they
Right.
were every 15 minutes. They have
That's
three,
standard.
yeah, they have three different shelters, committal shelters, and they would have a service on the hour, at quarter past the hour, and on the half hour. So shelter A would have services at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, so on. Shelter B would be like one like 9:15, 10:15, whatever, and then shelter C would be like 9:30, 10:30, whatever, something like that. But
Right.
they ran at a specific schedule, so they only had a certain number of burials or services, cremation, burials, cremation, interments, whatever. They only had a finite number of ability for that day.
Mhm.
And so, and oftentimes you don't get, I can't call a national cemetery and say, we're gonna come Tuesday it doesn't happen that way.
Right. They
So
tell you when you're coming.
they will tell you when the available options are. And
Yeah.
so what I would do is if I knew a family was wanting a particular service type, what I would do is I would now this is again going into too much detail, I think, but it's worth mentioning that when you schedule a national burial cemetery, you're not calling the cemetery. I don't call Fort Logan to schedule a burial. I call the cemetery hotline at Jefferson Barracks. It all goes through a central scheduling office.
Hmm.
However, what I can do and what I would do is I would call the cemetery directly. And maybe not all cemeteries would be cool with this. Maybe we just have a good one. I don't know. But I would call them and I would say, hey, I'm meeting this family. I know they're looking at like Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. At this point, what does your schedule show? And they would say, well, at this point at 8 a.m. on Thursday, it shows that we would maybe have a 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatever. Now, in the hour between I'm talking to them and I'm meeting the family, those could fill up. This is no guarantee.
Absolutely.
But I kind of have in my head that this is a possibility. And then I would always set up my case before the family came in as well, so that once I was ready to schedule it, it was a 15-minute phone call.
Yeah.
Um, but that's the best you can do. That's the best case scenario.
Absolutely.
And you have to again manage those expectations and let them know that there's one of two things we can do. We can either kind of plan backwards. We can get, all the information to national scheduling. We can let them, we can find out what times and days they have available for burials. You choose that first, and then we work your services back. That's one option. Second option is we have your services when you want them, understanding that that may mean we're going to go to burial a different day
Yeah.
and be okay with that. Most families are going to be okay with that if you explain it to them, manage those expectations immediately.
Hmm.
One of the benefits of having a national cemetery is it provides these things at no cost to the family. However, because of that, we are at the mercy of their schedule, and veterans from all over the country are buried at this cemetery. So, and it's just in how you talk about it. But that's the two ways you can really do it as a director and be efficient and successful with the family is either you set the burial first and work back, or they understand we got to have our service Monday. Okay, understanding that may mean we're going to the cemetery Wednesday or Thursday or something or a whole other day.
Or if you're going somewhere such as Arlington.
Mhm.
Now, Arlington is not like other national cemeteries. Arlington's a big deal, which means it has a waiting list.
Mhm.
And that wait list, depending on the time of year, depending on if it's wartime or not, depending on a lot of different factors, could be a couple of months, could be up to a year. And what happens when the burial isn't for a year?
This has never happened to me with a casketed burial. And I don't know that it would have made it. I'm not saying that families chose cremation because of that. That's not it. I'm in a high cremation part of the country. But, the several times that I have buried at Arlington, it was always cremation burials. The family would take the urn home. And then when we had a spot, I'd call them and then, that would happen. But I have not myself had to had to wait with a casketed embalmed body that long.
I think the longest I ever waited with a casketed burial from Arlington was 8 months.
Yeah. So what do you
But
do?
still, well, you embalm for delayed burial.
What does that mean?
And this is, when we understand that things are going to be a while off and we need to make sure that the presentation of this body is and the preservation of this body is going to maintain itself through until that point of burial, because it's not uncommon for that family to say, let's meet at the funeral home first. We'll have one more viewing with just the family, and just the family usually ends up being 30 or 40 people.
Uh-huh.
And then you close the casket again and you head off to the burial, not really thinking about the fact that it's been 8 months between the time that this person died and the time that this burial is happening. So we've got to figure out what we do to make sure that this person is still presentable 8 months from now, which is not as easy as it might initially seem.
Well, it's not, because if you're embalming strictly for presentation, you're going to forego some things that would give you a better presentation.
Right,
And if you're embalming strictly for presentation, you may not care as much about preservation.
right.
So I'm not saying they're not mutually exclusive. You can have good preservation and good presentation, but you have to really think about what you're doing, because most of the time when we're embalming for one or the, I mean, we're always embalming for both, but more for one or the other. We know we're going to bury the day after tomorrow. So we want this person, we can do these things because while
Right.
it may reduce our preservation, it's going to result in a better presentation. Or we know we're embalming for long-term preservation for whatever reasons. And because of that, we're going to have to forego some things that might give a better presentation, but that's okay. But in this case, I mean, you really have to balance it.
You do. And you have to go back to some of the tricks that service embalmers use. Service embalmers go into funeral homes never knowing what's going on with that person. They don't know if they're going to be buried 4 months from now, 4 minutes from now, no idea. So you always embalm with the thought in your head that this person's going to be around for a while.
Mhm. But
Cover
also
your
that the family is going to see them.
absolutely, absolutely. And so how do we, you know, come to a happy medium with all of these things? And one of the first things that I think about, humectants.
Well, stop before that. I think it's worth
Yeah.
mentioning that a thorough pre-embalming analysis.
Oh, of course.
You'd be doing on every case, but let's be real. Some of us need a reminder, a thorough pre-embalming analysis with these things.
Absolutely.
Go ahead. So we've done that, and now we want what?
You want to hit them with a strong fluid, but you want those humectants in there because loss of moisture is going to be one of the biggest problems. One of two things is going to happen over that period of time. You're either going to start to see decomposition or you're going to start to see desiccation.
However, moisture breeds decomposition.
It does, which means you've
So
got to
now
be
what?
responsible with it. You've got to be responsible with it. So generally what I will do is I'll start off with a pre-injection.
Of
I'm
what?
going to clear out all of the yuck in the system that I possibly can.
So
Now,
what are you pre-injecting? Are you using an anticoagulant? Are you using a low
well,
index? What are you using?
I use something that I affectionately refer to as unicorn farts in a bottle.
Oh, okay.
So, did you like my disappearing act there? It was
Yes,
cool.
that's great.
All right. So, there are many different types of pre-injections. Okay. You've got your anticoagulants, you've got all types of different things. My favorite pre-injection gets a little bit of boom from each.
Mhm,
So it's going to have a little bit of anticoagulant. It's going to have some surfactants to get those capillaries cleaned out.
mhm,
It's going to have just a teeny, teeny, tiny amount of index,
mhm.
just a little bit.
Right.
Because what that does is as you're doing that pre injection and you're clearing out those capillaries, It's going to help to solidify those capillaries in an open position, and not swelling them up to the point where they're closing off,
Right.
but preserving them just enough in that open position that as everything comes through, you're going to get much better diffusion, not distribution,
Right.
diffusion. And what's the
Well, you'll
difference
get
between,
both in theory, right?
in
Yeah.
theory, but there is a difference between distribution and diffusion. The distribution is how far from the end of your cannula is that fluid going? From nose to toes? Is it going all the way down? Whereas diffusion is how far into the tissue is it getting? And I think of it as a garden hose, okay? If I put my thumb on the garden hose, psh, length, that's my distribution. If I put my thumb on that garden hose and it goes from a stream like this to a stream like this, that's diffusion.
Mhm.
It's also the difference between pressure and rate of flow.
Mhm.
So that pressure is the amount of force coming out. That rate of flow is the amount of material coming out. So you could have the same force with more material. You could have, and those are affecting each other. You reduce that rate of flow, that pressure goes down. You increase that rate of flow, that pressure goes up. All fun laws of physics.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, my favorite, and I'm trying to get away from actually naming chemicals, but I do have a favorite. It is hexyethylphenoform from Embalmers Supply Company, or ESCO, and we can put that link in our notes so that you can go look at ESCO's website. That
Mhm.
is one of my favorites. Another one of my favorites is from Trinity Fluids called PI 3-in-1.
Okay.
And that one works really well too. And with that one, you can use considerably less. You've got to use about 2 bottles a gallon for hexyethylphenoform as it goes through for a
Right.
pre-injection. With PI 3-in-1, you can use 4 to 6 ounces.
Mhm.
So a little bit of savings there. But once you manage to get everything through, and this is the important part, you're clearing out possible contaminants in the system. One of the biggest problems with preservation isn't the fact that you didn't get fluid where you didn't want it or where you wanted it. It's the fact that the fluid was somehow neutralized once it got there. And one of the most common neutralizing factors is nitrogen.
Mhm.
Nitrogen neutralizes formaldehyde. It's a pain in the butt, but it does. And when you're looking at the waste the body creates, it's all nitrogen based. When
Mhm.
you're looking at the medications that we give people, all nitrogen based. And all of that built up in the bloodstream means that when the formaldehyde hits it, you're not getting the oomph you think you're getting.
Right.
So if you use that pre-injection as a flush and get all of the blood and the contaminants out of the system first, you're going to start off great.
Yeah.
You're going to start off great. After that, I go anywhere, depending on case analysis. I'm going to go for a 5% or less solution. Why would I choose 5%? Is it a random number? Did I just pull it out of my ear?
Probably not. Why did you
Probably
choose
not.
that?
What we find is once you tend to get closer to a 5% solution, that's where the capillaries start to wall off.
Mhm.
Now, those capillaries are not burning like people
Right.
tend to say they are. They're swelling, okay? And when the formaldehyde releases in the bloodstream instead of in the tissue, what happens when you get too much formaldehyde in the face, Faith?
It gets gray
It
or
gets gray.
green.
What else happens?
It swells. Yep.
Puffs up. It's the same thing that that capillary is doing. It's attaching, it's swelling up, and it's closing off those teeny tiny little capillaries. The result is the same. It's still walled off. You're not getting anything to that tissue, but the terminology is a little bit different. It's not really burned, it's just swollen. So now we've done that pre-injection, so we've got a little bit holding those capillaries open. Now, if we keep it under a 5% solution, we're going to make sure that they stay open.
Mhm.
Okay. So once we get that 5% solution in there, using a moderate amount of humectant. Don't overload, don't waterlog the individual. Use a moderate amount of humectant, which is going to be based on case analysis. And I'm not going to tell you one bottle of humectant is good. No, it's going to depend on the case 100%. But keep it moderate. Keep
Yeah.
it moderate. But the most important thing to remember is that you're not done when you're done embalming. You are not done. You have to keep track of that body. Go in and check on it on a regular basis. Is it starting to dry out? Do I see problem spots? Do I need to go back and hypodermically inject the hips and the
Yep.
thighs,
But
areas with lots of fat that may be going bad?
or where
Go
it's
ahead.
touching the table. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Gotta make
But
sure.
what were, I'm sorry, I think I cut you off. What were you going to
Oh,
say?
I was just gonna say the butt, like where there's
Oh,
pressure
yeah.
against the table if you haven't.
I thought that was a yes, but I don't know.
No, the butt.
But what?
Yeah.
You got it right.
So would you change anything you do with aspiration or cavity embalming?
Well, I'm a little more thorough with aspiration and cavity embalming than most people. Not all, but most people that I know. I'm more thorough with it. Nobody gets delayed aspiration for me.
Me
Nobody.
either. I mean, that's another thing. But
There is an idea behind delayed aspiration that it allows the fluid more time to diffuse and get into the system. However, that's not how it works.
right.
The only reason
Well,
that
it's not
fluid,
just chilling in your like aorta. If there's no
exactly,
pressure from a machine pushing it in, it's not moving.
yes.
So this
And
idea that we're gonna like suck it out back out, there's
yeah,
no, it's not moving.
that's what most people don't understand. You know, here's one of the first things that most of us learned in mortuary school. When you're done, you tie off the vessels, right?
Tie off the vessels.
You tie off the carotid and the jugular, right? And then you go in and you fill it full of holes like Swiss cheese. And what good did that just do?
Yeah.
Absolutely none. Absolutely none, because it's not staying in the circulatory system.
Mhm.
It's diffusing. And without any pressure, there's nothing pushing it to go anywhere. It's just little puddles.
Yeah.
So that's not really a concern. I'm not concerned about going in and aspirating and sucking
And
out a whole.
unembalming while you're while
Yeah,
you're
and
doing
I'm not unembalming the
yeah.
body while I'm doing that. I'm not pulling the formaldehyde out because it's not. And it's if it's being used, it's no longer in a liquid form that I can pull out. It has formed the protein in my body. It's made that methylene bridge, and it's a completely different substance now. It's not even formaldehyde anymore.
Yep.
All right. So I'm not pulling it out of the system when I'm aspirating. So I'm not delaying my aspiration because I am of the opinion it doesn't do a darn bit of good. So I'm going to aspirate immediately, like I do with everyone else. And I'm one of those people where I'm aspirating up, I'm aspirating down. And then when I'm all done, I go back in through the incision and I
Yes.
aspirate through the incision.
Do that too. People think I'm crazy sometimes.
People think I'm crazy too. But do you know how much is missed right here?
Oh, a ton.
You pull out so much going through the incision, so much. So forget tying off the vessel. That's not doing you any good. Go back through and aspirate through the incision, and you will never have a problem again, ever. I don't even put absorbent powder in half the time.
Oh, see, I'll do everything because I don't want it to leak. I'll do the most, but
Yeah, I mean, I do it. I do it sometimes, but I don't think there's going to be an issue. I don't use the powder because I've already gone through and I've used a trocar and I've sucked out every last bit of moisture that's actually going to be in
yeah.
there. And I always I'm a 2 bottle person when it
Yep.
comes to cavity treatment. Some people seem to think that cavity fluid is going to leak out. Um, no, it absorbs into the tissues. That's the entire reason it's used. It's a high absorptive fluid.
Mhm.
And if it is leaking out, you probably just didn't give it enough time to sit.
Yeah.
You know, don't put the cavity fluid in and then immediately roll them over. Now,
Right.
that's probably not going to be a good idea. But if you give them a little bit of time to sit,
You're
they're
not gonna get
perfectly fine.
leakage from that point, the next day.
Right, right, exactly. So I'll still use my 2 bottles of cavity fluid, you know? Um, but I just make sure that the aspiration is thorough and that the cavity embalming is thorough. I don't put the trocar in, put the bottle on, and just hold it and wait.
Right.
You move the trocar
Uh,
around, you get it into the different areas, you do what you're supposed to do, and you should be just fine. Now, is there anything additional that you do?
I don't thi I'm not a trade embalmer, and I kind of I'm a little bit of a fence sitter on some things because I feel like when I'm embalming, I wanna do as much as the body needs and no more.
Right.
So
Yeah.
to me, if it's a small person and they may not need, in my opinion, 2 bottles, especially if they're going for burial the next day
Sure. Sure.
or traditional cremation or something. So it's case dependent, and I like to do just what it needs,
Mhm.
not more just because we could do more.
Mhm.
Um, and some people, think that you should do the most every time to be the most safe or the most thorough or the most whatever, and I don't think that's wrong,
No.
but for me,
No.
I just think if for me, I feel best about as an embalmer, the most ethical, whatever you want to put it, when I do what the body needs and not anything additional just to do it.
And I think that if I was working in a funeral home full
Mhm.
time, that would probably be the approach that I had because I would have more information about that
Yeah,
individual.
sure.
I would have more information about when the burial is going to be.
Mhm.
Maybe I met with the family and I know what they're expecting,
Right.
that type of thing, as opposed to being a service embalmer where I don't have any
Yeah.
information. In fact, sometimes I'm lucky if I can get a name out of them.
Right.
It's like, come on, guys, I need the name,
Yeah.
case number if you got it. I got to do my embalming report. I can't leave it empty. So I get as much information as I can, but that doesn't mean I know when the burial's going to be.
Sure.
It doesn't mean if I know if there's going to be a burial, there
Yep.
could be cremation afterwards. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. So I do as much as I think that the body can take, as
Yeah.
opposed
That's a
to
good way to
what I
put it.
think the
Yeah.
body would need.
Hmm.
So that's a little bit different because, like you say, when you're embalming for preservation, you're sacrificing some of that presentation and vice versa. And most of us know how to balance that if you've got the experience behind you. But hey, we're talking to a whole bunch of people right now that may not necessarily have that experience.
Yeah.
So, figuring out where that line is, where you're going to start to sacrifice some of your presentation in order to get additional preservation, that's when you really need to sit there and think about, do I need to do this?
Right.
Do I really need to do this? You know, but now comes the aftercare.
Hmm.
You've got to check on that
Oh,
body
you have to, and
all the time.
you have to prevent dehydration. You have
Yep.
to, I mean, you still, again, we don't want to refrigerate embalmed bodies,
No,
but we don't
but
want
keep it
them,
in a cooler,
yeah, we
drier room.
don't want them in the temperature regulated room either.
Right. You keep them in
So,
a cool, dry room. Make sure that there is no airflow over the top of the body. So if they're in a casket, keep the lid down. If, if you've got to put a sheet over them, if they're not in a casket for some reason, I don't know why
I
they
would
wouldn't
say
be.
even in a casket, and again, I'm from New Mexico and Colorado, I'd put plastic, just, like
Yeah.
a plastic over.
Which up north, you've got to be careful about that because the condensation
Yep.
will get trapped in there and you get mold.
Yep.
So I tend to
That
avoid
depends.
plastic
Yeah. Uh-huh.
because of that. It's just a climate thing. But one of the things that I always did is I would put a sheet over them,
Hmm.
but watch that nose. Okay.
Oh gosh, yeah, you
You
don't.
do not want heat rest on the nose because you're going to end up with somebody that's like this.
Yep.
After a while, even the weight, the little bit of weight from the sheet is going to push that
Well,
nose
and
down.
you're gonna have a texture too of the sheet. I mean, unless it's
Yep.
no matter what it
Yep.
is, really, you're gonna have a
And well,
there.
what I did, Faith, you're going to laugh at this. I designed a thingamajig. That's all I
Oh,
call it. It's a thingamajig. Okay. I took a
is it a
square.
wire hanger that you
No, no,
you know what I'm
square.
talking about though, don't you?
I do. Okay, so here's what I did.
Yeah.
Took a piece of metal
Yep.
and I bolted 4 radio antennas to the corner.
Okay.
Okay. Those
Yep.
like telescoping antennas. It goes under the head block. And those 4 scoping or those 4
Yep.
antenna come up. The
Then
sheet sits on top of the antenna. So it's not resting on the face.
that's good.
It's
Yeah.
resting on
So
the
it's the
antenna.
same thing as the wire
So
hanger pulled,
yeah.
but
So
yeah,
it
that's good. Yeah.
keeps them covered, but
Yeah.
it's not sitting on the face. And if
Yep.
I need to push it up more, I can extend the antenna. And if I need to pull it down more,
That
crunch
is
that.
a good idea.
That's my thingamajig.
Yeah.
It's my thingamajig, and I like my thingamajig.
That's a good one.
Patent
Yep.
pending.
Yep. There you go. Yeah, right. Yeah. But and again, it depends on climate. If you're in some areas of the country, you might see now again for me, I've always embalmed in very dry climates, and packing the nose and all of those things wasn't really something we considered much of because we don't have bugs. I mean, we
Yeah,
do, but we don't have the likelihood
the
that we're
nasal intruding bugs.
yeah, we don't have many of those. And so, where if maybe you're in the South or in more humid climates or whatever, that's something, the ears or the wherever, those
Mhm.
insects that you can barely see might go to find some kind of whatever, you might have to think about that differently. I wouldn't worry about that myself because that's not going to happen.
I think my worst experience was living in Florida
Mm.
because it's the
Okay,
heat.
I mean, that's it though, right? Just living in Florida.
Yeah,
That's it.
dead stop right there.
Yep,
Living in
period.
Florida, period. Love you, Albert Hobb. Anyway, um, living in Florida with the humidity and the heat
Mm,
not only gives you bugs, it gives you monster bugs. It gives you
I
like
oh no,
crazy pterodactyl style
oh
bugs.
no.
And so packing was always a
Sure.
necessity. And I think that's one of the reason that people there's a trope in funeral service where nobody wants a body from Florida.
Well, no, for a lot of reasons, and one of them is they come with stuff that we don't need to be translocating.
That's true. That's true. But there's a thought that that Florida embalmers are not as good, and I can tell you that's not true. It's the climate. The climate adds to
It
whether
makes
or
it more
not you're
complicated,
whether or
sure.
not things work.
Yeah.
It's not Florida embalmers, it's just Florida.
Well, I mean, that's true for anybody. If you're an embalmer and you move to another part of the country, you're going to have a
You have
learning
to
curve.
relearn.
Yeah.
I When I moved from Michigan to North Carolina, I was like, well, this is different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, not only just, the climate or that, but the expectations of the
absolutely.
people, you know what I mean? I mean,
Northerners and Southerners want two totally different things
when
when it comes to
where I
wedding.
learned to embalm, this is the truth, and I tell my students all the time, where I learned to embalm, if you could not knock on their abdomen, they weren't well embalmed.
Yep.
If I did that in some other funeral home, that would be like the craziest thing they've
Mhm.
ever seen, over
Yeah.
embalming. So if you the point, I guess if you're an experienced person listening, if you get a new embalmer, give them some grace. There's a learning curve. I can tell you personally from moving different places in the country, not only just the climate or what may be available as far as supplies or materials or fluids or whatever, but also the expectations of the families are different.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. Even coming back to Michigan from
Yeah,
North Carolina, I'd forgotten half of my Michigan embalming skills.
yeah.
And I'm like coming back going, oh yeah, we can't do that here. Oh yeah, okay, okay,
Oh gosh, yeah.
yeah,
I worked for somebody that did like pinning smiles. Do you know what this is?
I do.
I thought that was crazy.
Yeah,
They do it.
there's a what I consider a better way to do it
Mhm.
instead of doing the pinning.
Yeah.
Just fill the apple of the cheek a little bit more because you notice when you smile,
Yeah, it brings it up. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what goes up. So you fill up the apple of the cheek and just use your fingers to slightly, just slightly upturn
Yeah.
the sides of the mouth, but don't use anything but your fingers or else it'll just look creepy.
Yeah.
Tiny little smile,
Yep.
fill up the apple of the cheek a little bit more. That gives you a
Neutrally pleasant.
neutrally pleasant
There you
expression.
go.
There you go. There
Yeah.
you
Have
go.
you ever heard of the Chicago mouth?
The Chicago mouth. No.
So
Tell me
when
about
I
it.
so
Tell me
when I
about
moved,
it, Ben.
yeah, yeah, when I well I went to school in Chicago, I learned to embalm in that area. And then when I went to New Mexico, they said, "Oh, I bet she does the Chicago mouth." And I'm like, "Well, the what?" And apparently this is the Chicago mouth.
Oh, the oh, I hate that.
Like full, like flat across, you know what I'm saying? Like my
I
like
do.
that.
Yes.
Apparently that's
Yeah.
it.
It's like you're flexing your platysma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's still a thing, but I was accused of it.
You're accused of the Chicago mouth. How dare
Yeah,
you?
I know, but that was also where I learned you have to knock on the abdomen, so it's probably true. But you know, Chicago's a major city. There's a lot of ship outs. There's a lot of,
Yeah.
a whole lot of different cultures and things that you're working with there that
I wonder what Detroit's
yeah,
famous for.
I
That's
don't
where I learned.
we all
I
got
don't
bad
know.
water, don't you?
No, that's Flint.
I was gonna say maybe your embalmings are bad because your water's bad. I don't know.
No, actually, they would be better because they had lead in the water, and lead
And
would actually
yeah.
improve the embalming experience. But let's not get into that rabbit hole.
All right.
So,
So
what are you
checking
thinking?
on your bodies, you're, making sure that they're not too warm, not too dry, not too whatever, not too this. Um, but I mean, you just have to keep checking. That's it.
Yeah, it's just maintenance. The maintenance is going to keep you from having to fix something that is much, much worse.
Mm-hmm.
Check in on them every day, say hello.
Yeah.
They're probably bored. Talk to them for a little bit,
Yeah. Well,
talk on their condition.
yeah.
So, what are we thinking for next week, Faith?
Oh gosh, we could do just
Should we
fine.
take suggestions?
We could take suggestions if we don't get any suggestions we like.
All
We,
right. So, how about this? Momticians@gmail.com. Send us some suggestions for next week's show. And if we don't like what you send us, we're just going to pick what we want. How's that?
yes, I like that very much.
Woo! All right. Faith, it has been awesome as usual.
Good to see you. Thank you.
And today's episode is sponsored by Good Judy Garage and Go Ahead Faith.
And oh, Good Judy Garage, Denver's only openly queer owned and operated auto shop. So,
Woohoo!
yep,
And Rotobahn Mortuary Education and Consulting, which is my consulting company. And I consult. I do
yep,
all
yep.
that.
Well,
All
thanks
right.
for watching. Make good choices, everybody, and we will
Make
see
good
you
choices.
next time. Bye.
Right? Bye, Faith.